Good morning, and welcome to our webcast, Cyber Insurance 101, How to Save Millions of Dollars in Years of Recovering Your Business, organized by NordPass, a cybersecurity solution that reduces risks of unauthorized access to your company's systems and can help businesses with their cyber insurance readiness. I'm Patty Harmon, Editor-in-Chief of the Property Casualty 360 Group, which includes propertycasualty360.com, and your Property and Casualty Magazine and Claims Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. If you have a question for one of our speakers, please enter it into the Q&A widget on the right side of your console. We'll answer as many questions as possible during the live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and a link will be sent to you later. So let's move on to the reason why all of you are here. Today we'll be discussing a critical topic for businesses of all sizes, particularly for small and medium-sized companies, cybersecurity and the role of cyber insurance. Protecting data is a key strategy to managing every aspect of cyber risk. And some of you may think that you're probably not at risk, but let me share a few quick facts with you. 43% of cyber attacks target small businesses, and 60% of the small businesses that suffer a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months. There was a 424% increase in the number of cyber breaches targeting small businesses just over the past year. And according to a recent white paper released by Chubb Insurance, an average of 50 new software vulnerabilities are published every day that can exploit weaknesses in your systems if patches aren't applied in a timely manner. So those updates you always put off, yeah, don't do that. Ransomware, which is the #1 area of concern for many companies, is the new business model for hackers to successfully fund their enterprises. According to Cyber Insurer Coalition, the average ransom demand increased nearly threefold in the last half of 2021, and they expect ransomware to be a serious threat well into 2022. I've spoken with a number of insurers who have voiced the very same concern. In 2021, you may have heard about a number of attacks against security software tools and programs like Mimecast, LinkedIn, Microsoft. An insurance broker, Woodruff Sawyer, says they had far-reaching impacts throughout the technology supply chain. Given the success of these attacks, we expect more to occur in 2022. In their annual cyber risk survey, Zurich Insurance found that the #1 concern for respondents in terms of business continuity risks was that a company's network would be held hostage. And I recently heard a new term, which maybe some of our experts are familiar with, cyber gangs. Apparently, they've made ransomware a bit of an art form, and they will take a company's network hostage, ask them to pay a ransom, and then still threaten to release the information or utilize some second extortion attempt. They are well organized and in many cases very well funded. And earlier this week, Allianz released their Risk Barometer 2022 report. And for the second time in the survey's 11-year history, cyber incidents topped the list as the #1 risk that concerns businesses. And if you think a cyber attack won't happen to you, let me share this one personal story. A man I know worked for a small 5-person construction firm. They used a small 2-person accounting firm for their accounting and payroll needs. The accounting firm's system was hacked and information for all of their clients was stolen. Bogus federal and state tax returns were filed with the stolen information, and this affected all of the clients, including the ones at the construction firm. That data breach took place in 2016. And 6 years later, those employees are still affected by the breach every year when they go to file their taxes. I also know of small businesses that haven't been able to access their customer databases, plans, or reports for clients because they were locked out of their systems, or who lost years of research and information. A single breach can have very far-ranging consequences. So let me introduce you to our experts who are joining us today to share their insights and knowledge. Dan Burke is a recognized industry leader and expert in cyber liability insurance. As the national cyber practice leader at Woodruff Sawyer, Dan drives the strategy to continue to grow their cyber business. Under his watch, the cyber practice has been nominated as the broking team of the year 2 years in a row. Andrew Lipton is vice president and head of cyber claims at AM Trust Financial Services. He leads the cyber team and incident response team and coordinates with the company's agents, brokers, and insureds nationwide to ensure superior cyber claims service. Brian Falchuk is the founder and managing partner of Insurance Evolution Partners, which advises carriers and their partners on how to navigate an evolving industry facing disruption and change. Brian spent 20 years in the insurance industry, including serving as the head of claims for Hiscox USA and leading growth for InsurTech communications solution, Hi Marley. He also held leadership positions at carriers like Liberty Mutual and Beazley. Alexander Cherry is the UK insurance research lead at Accenture. He covers general insurance, London markets, and life pensions in the UK and Ireland, with responsibilities for tracking key industry trends, including technology disruption, cybersecurity, and sustainability. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's begin our time by talking about different ways to survive what we'll call the cyber Wild West. Can you start by telling me what are some of the most common types of cyber attacks you've seen on small and medium businesses? And Andrew, I'm going to ask you that question first.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me here. Thank you to NordPass and to you, Patricia, for having us all here to speak about this. I think it's not a surprise to folks that are in the cyber industry to know that, and outside the industry, frankly, to know that attacks on small businesses have been pretty highly prevalent in the last couple of years. If I had to single out a sort of smaller sector of attacks that I would say have been popping up some more affecting small businesses that folks should pay attention to, it would really have to do with what I would call business function attacks. And what I mean by that is, small businesses sort of survive month to month on invoicing, online payments, dealing with contractors, paying rent, completing payroll. And the cyber attacks that I'm seeing affecting those small businesses are the ones where there's something inserted in the middle of that type of transaction to disrupt it. So what could that mean? That could mean fraudulent payment instructions, right? Where a contractor sends, someone hacks a contractor's email, sends a bogus payment instruction on an invoice to a business, says, please wire the funds to here in exchange for that service. And those instructions come out fake, right? And the money leaves the door from the small business. And once the dust settles, the business realizes that they've sent money out the door to not the contractor. So attacks like that have been highly prevalent, and in sum and substance, that's what I've been focusing on in particular at AmTrust, helping small businesses harden against those type of cyber attacks and others.
Great. Alex, I'll go to you next. What are some of the most common types of attacks that you've seen from your perspective?
So my perspective is slightly more high level than Andrew's. So in terms of the kind of the general trends that I've seen across the industry as a whole, particularly the kind of small business end, we've obviously seen the explosion of ransomware with the kind of ransomware as a service model. So up to a few years ago, it tended to be viewed as the sort of thing that only happened to large companies, and part of that is just the economics of it. Hackers need a big prize to invest the money to actually set up the hack. But now, it's just become so cheap that they can basically go after anybody with a tailor-made ransom. So I'd say that that's definitely something which has come into the, that's come onto the radar. I'd also say there's been some kind of innovation, if that's the right word, from the hackers in terms of kind of double extortion techniques. So not just encrypting files, but also kind of basically threatening to publish them after they've been encrypted. So there are kind of two angles of attack. So it's a kind of a combination of, I guess, the old-fashioned data breach and the more newfangled ransomware. So plenty going on.
Yes, without a doubt. Dan, I'm sure you've seen a lot lot of different activities as well for your clients.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to me, the ultimate damage that gets talked about by Andrew and Alex is certainly interesting to me. I actually focus more on how they actually first got in, right? And that's where, to me, there's such an easy lift for so many companies to protect themselves, right? The number one entry point for ransomware, for attackers into any network, still remains social engineering. And so convincing employees to click on that link or open that attachment in an email that they weren't expecting. And if you look at it, employee training, we all sort of, within the industry, I think, or even within any company, roll our eyes when you say, oh, I got to do another cybersecurity training. And yet it is so effective at raising awareness and keeping employees alert for the types of attacks that are super successful, that get the attackers that first foot in the door and allow them to go deploy ransomware or steal data or send fraudulent wire instructions.
Brian, I'll ask you as well, what are some of the common types that you've seen? Because you have been looking at cybersecurity from a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, and early on, when you couldn't even sell a cyber policy because no one was interested, and there were no webinars to talk about it because it wasn't a theme in the industry. There were no products yet. It's really interesting. I mean, Patty, if you look at what everybody said, I totally agree. But there's a word you used in your opener when you said, you used the word enterprises, and you were talking about the hackers. And all the things we're talking about, if you think, they're being driven by the same sort of business innovations and tools and business evolution that we're trying to use on the carrier side, on the broker side, on the, whatever industry, about efficiency, about better technology, about the democratization of data and some of these tools. And Alex, you mentioned ransomware as a service. I mean, the fact that hacking gets one of these AAS, like, platforms as a service and software as a service. Why on earth is hacking as a service? But it is. And so when you think about all of the innovations we're all depending on to be more efficient and better tools and better customer experience, the hackers have all of those things as well. So they have found ways to, it's not what we see on TV and the movies where it's like the whole world gets shut down. I mean, sure, that level of thing happens to companies and it's still out there, but it's these unnoticed, really efficient, multi-pronged strategies where they're hitting lots of different people in small amounts in ways they'd never catch on to, everything that people are talking about here, because it's been enabled in the same way their target businesses, when they're thinking about who to hack, have been enabled. So it's like a totally different paradigm. They're not just some criminals acting in the shade off on the side. They're businesses, they're enterprises, to use your word, Patty. So I think we need to think about that differently. And that means our response needs to be different as well.
I remember when I first started covering cybersecurity, one of the things that I learned for a story I was writing was that when these hackers would steal your information and then they would sell it to someone else to use nefariously, if there were problems with the stolen information, they had customer service departments to help you. So if you wanted to buy, if you wanted to buy a list of young professionals in Southern New York City and you found out that, oh, this list doesn't work well, you could call their customer service department and say, hey, you know what? This list is really not working for me. Do you have something else? And it just blew my mind that these enterprises did indeed operate very much like a legitimate business does. So one of the other questions I wanted to ask, and I'll throw this one to you first, Dan, is we know that it's not a matter of if a company will experience a cyber event, but when. So can you tell our audience what cyber insurance is, what it does and doesn't cover, and what are some of the benefits of having a policy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And cyber insurance is one tool, I think, to help businesses stay in business, frankly, and defend against cybersecurity attacks, right? It comes on the back end. So it's after an attack happens. And I think if you take that position of it's not if, it's when, and that no security is 100% foolproof, right? Insurance becomes a very valuable piece to any business. Cyber insurance is there to help you respond and recover from a a cyber attack. So it covers everything from data breaches to network intrusions to social engineering to fraudulent funds transfer to ransomware. From the costs that you incur yourselves to respond to that event, hiring attorneys, hiring cyber forensics providers, setting up call centers if you have significant personally identifiable information that gets out and you need to notify consumers, all the notification, all the call centers, as well as third-party liability. So any liability that comes on from follow-on lawsuits, whether it's class actions, whether it's regulatory investigations, fines and penalties, and then a third component, which actually is very valuable to many companies, is the business interruption piece. Excuse me. So the business interruption piece, if you think of a ransomware event, right, you've got the initial response of attorneys and forensics, you've got the ransom payment that potentially can be covered by insurance. But while your network is down, you're also not generating revenue or profits, or you're still incurring expenses if you're not profitable, right? And so all of that cost that is sort of hidden can be recovered through an insurance policy as well. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. I think the one thing I will say about cyber insurance and sort of what it covers, the line between what it covers and what it doesn't. A common misconception that I see and hear from clients and customers is, well, if it happens in this specific way, is it actually going to be covered? Cyber insurance typically responds to the fact that an event happened, not necessarily how it happened from a technical perspective. And that is such a clear distinction that I think needs to be made when you're talking about the value of cyber insurance.
Yeah. Andrew, anything that you want to add to that in terms of what you see and what you're seeing in terms of coverage?
Well, definitely. And I think, Dan's description is exactly right. I think it's interesting from my perspective, especially at AmTrust, where we're focusing on small business cyber risk. Many times I'm tasked with answering this question and putting it in the most concrete terms possible. And so here's what I've come up with, and I'm hoping folks and people on this panel are receptive to it. In my view, cyber insurance, covers the risk, or it addresses the risk that your business will incur financial expense as a result of a cyber event, right? So a cyber event could be, like Dan was saying, an interruption in your business because one of your critical systems has gone down. It could be the financial expense that your business incurs because they have to hire specialized forensic investigators to come in and figure out the origin of a cyber attack, so that attorneys can then help with any notification requirements or any other requirements that state, local, federal law places on a business when a cyber event happens. So if you think about each of those critical components, there's a financial expense attached to each of them. In my view, putting it in that sort of brass tacks type terms helps to crystallize the purpose of the cyber insurance product for many business owners and many decision makers. If you think of these things each as potential buckets of financial expense, and I think even for small and nano businesses, I think sort of 25 to 50 million in revenue and under, the average cost of a cyber event is tens of thousands of dollars. And so when I'm having this discussion with small business owners and agents addressing them, if you think of your pizza shop on the corner having a system interruption, and let's say they don't have insurance and the event gives rise to tens of thousands of dollars in financial expense. Well, tens of thousands in financial expense can be really harsh on a local business owner and can seriously threaten their ability to make payroll, to make rent that month. And so when I think of a cyber insurance product, that's at this point in time, that's my sort of precise definition of it, as I think business owners should think of it as well.
Yeah. And what you're saying, it kind of dovetails into the question I was going to ask Alex. A lot of times when there are financial stresses for smaller companies, they may decide to cancel like non-mandatory insurance coverage. Why do you think that it is so important for them to understand that cyber insurance really does provide them with a long-term or a longer-term risk management strategy?
So I think the issue with cyber is that it's one of the few things really that has the potential to completely unseat a small business. So, small businesses, and this goes back to the example of kind of the pizza shop that Andrew was just talking about. Small businesses don't have the necessarily the reserves of cash. They perhaps don't have the access to the credit or whatever to cover those vital costs in the event of an emergency. So it's kind of, I would see it as a sort of crash mat that basically guarantees that, I suppose, all those decades of work potentially that have gone into building up your small enterprise can't just be wiped out overnight. So I'd say out of, it's something where there are sort of nice to haves and there are must haves, and there are certainly aspects of cyber cover where you as a small business could take the risk. But I think in terms of just ensuring solvency in the worst case scenario, that's something that you should try absolutely to hold on to.
So, Brian, one of the things that I think concerns some companies is that they think, oh, if I purchase cyber insurance, it's going to make me more of a target to hackers, especially if they become aware that a company has cyber insurance. From your perspective, do you think that cyber insurance increases a company's risk of being attacked? Does it help to offset the impact of a cyber event, or both of those, both sides of that perspective?
Well, so it's an interesting one, and I hear that, and Dan and I used to work together at a carrier, and we had a kidnap and ransom business, and that's a space where you never want to let on that you have that coverage, because instantly it's like, if I nab this person, that's $1 million. So I get that fear. I think cyber's a little bit different because, first of all, how do you know? So with kidnap and ransom, it typically is very wealthy people or expats. There's a way to target in on a population. We're talking about everyone, everywhere, every single business, everywhere. So how do you know, where do you there's no rich kids of Instagram analog for cyber insurance. I don't know if that's even a thing anymore, but that was actually one of the ways that a very wealthy, multi-billion billionaire, their kid was targeted and landed somewhere where they were living it up on their private jet, and immediately had to fly back home because security stepped in because it was discovered. Where are they? And we know they have coverage. There really is no basis for that in cyber. So should you go around advertising that you have coverage? Well, should you go around advertising you have lots of different coverages? Because you're inviting problems. So I don't think cyber is there's no national registry of cyber insured entities. It's not like auto insurance where fraudsters will step in front of a car when they see, oh, it's got this state's plates and that state mandates coverage, so if I get hit. There's no analog in cyber. So I understand the fear 100%. I don't think we have all of the pieces in place. And that said, if you have your cyber policy sitting in your server, which gets hacked, well, then they would see that you had it. But remember, they had to hack you to see that. So you were already a target. They already came in. Whether you had coverage or not, it's too late. So to me, this isn't one that has teeth. And I think let's not use that as a reason not to protect ourselves.
Yeah, Brian, I agree with that 100%. I just wanted to add that, to me, it's a causation correlation issue. I don't know that in any instance where an attack has happened, you can say that the attack was caused by the fact that the attackers knew insurance existed.
Yeah.
There's never been a cyber event I've been involved with on the carrier side or when I was an outside counsel before, where the basis of the attack was the attacker's discovery that insurance existed.
Yeah.
Is there correlation? Perhaps, but to your point, it's not enough to, I think, make the legitimate argument that the existence of insurance or lack thereof somehow negates the prevalence of attacks.
Dan, anything you want to add to that?
I don't know that there is much more to add, right? I think
Okay.
the one interesting case study to me in this whole conversation about having cyber insurance and does it make it worse is actually the ransomware attack that a cyber insurance carrier themselves suffered. And they're not represented on this call, but CNA Insurance had their own cyber attack, and I don't call it out in the fact that that it makes them a bad insurance carrier, because it doesn't. I think every insurance company has had incidents, whether they're disclosed or not. Every insurance broker has had incidents, whether they're disclosed or not. But what I will say is they are reportedly, I guess, have paid the largest ever ransom. And I think a lot of that to do, at least the innuendo around that, is that the attackers were able to get their policy list, their customer holder list, right? And so it becomes a question for them, and really gets to the question that every company faces when they're facing this decision of, do I pay or do I not pay, right? It's a financial decision. At the end of the day, it is not about not supporting attackers or trying not to facilitate this problem further. It is a very personal decision, and it is very much financially driven. Is it cheaper for you as a business to restore from your backups, suffer your downtime, not engage with the attackers? Or is it going to be so problematic for you to do that that you then decide to pay the ransom and go down that path? It is financially motivated, and you need to be able to make that decision and have the data available to you about your own business, about your own finances, to be able to make that determination of, is the amount they're demanding that I've negotiated down, hopefully, is it worthwhile to pay that, or should I keep down this path of not engaging with the attackers? For CNA, when they had when their customer list was out there, or reportedly had access to that customer list, it was that changes the dynamics of how much they're willing to pay, right?
Patty, can I jump in on that real quickly?
Yeah,
I know I started on this question, but there's a question that came in that I think ties to what Dan was just saying. It's about the financial impact, and more than just the financial, actually, like figuring out, what do I need to do and how do I do it and where do I turn for these things, which is a huge question for a lot of companies, because you don't just have your forensic data expert and security folks sitting around on speed dial. You don't even know where to turn for most businesses. Someone asked about insurance is the transfer of risk. So if you're using all of these SaaS solutions and cloud solutions and you get hacked, isn't that on them? So isn't it their problem to pay for and take care of? Well, in a sense, yes, depending on the situation, but that's an E&O policy issue. That's professional liability, which means you need to bring a claim against them, which has to be adjudicated. And that could take months or years. So your business that's hacked today, do you want to go and sue Amazon or whoever, or Google, whoever your cloud provider is, because you think that's where it came from, to have to prove that they're the source of it, to go through that? And meanwhile, your business is shut down, or you're paying out of pocket to get yourself up and running. So it's not to say maybe ultimately there isn't another responsible party, but that's not what cyber insurance is about. It's about getting yourself back up and running. Or perhaps, they did have it fall out. You mentioned this accounting firm, there's carriers who work with law firms that get hit. And so then that carrier has to invoke their cyber policy. You can rely on someone else, but are you willing to stake your business on that? I think that's the issue here, is how do I make sure I stay in business, I get up and running again, and I can deal with a 3-year-long lawsuit another day, but right now I need to be able to serve my customers.
Alex, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Or if not, I'll ask you the next question.
Well, I was just thinking about the ransomware question, and I think I'm aligned with everybody in the sense that you always want to have ransomware as a company. You don't ransomware insurance, should I say, as a company. You don't want to be the one that doesn't have it. But I think that there is an interesting consideration, as we see cyber insurance become more widespread, which is hopefully what we're all aiming for. Because fundamentally, not on the level of individual firms, but just on the level of the market, it makes ransoms easier to pay and higher ransoms easier to pay. So I can see a situation where just over time that there could be an updrift in terms of the amount of money that is involved in ransomware, that is partly facilitated by the spread of the insurance product, and obviously that all goes back into premiums. But I don't think we necessarily have all the bits of the jigsaw puzzle to be able to sort of look that far out into the future. So I think definitely one to watch.
I'll just make a quick announcement, just a reminder, if you have any questions. I see we have a bunch of them, so I think we may get to the Q&A portion a little bit sooner than maybe I had originally planned. But Alex, I wanted to ask a question. So we've talked about the importance of cyber insurance, but what are some cybersecurity tools that businesses can use to help mitigate their cyber risk? And like, what role do employee training and company policies play in helping to reduce those risks as well? So Alex, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I think Dan made this point earlier that a lot of cyber attacks are kind of fundamentally low tech or no tech, or at least that they rely on a stage which is low tech. So potentially a phishing email, or a computer system not having the most recent updates and patches. So it's not really a sort of cybersecurity tool per se, but I think it's going after the low-hanging fruit first. So definitely mandating training for your employees. However annoying they may find the constant call to do e-learnings. I think ensuring, as well as part of just general employee responsibilities, that workstations are always kind of up to date. The computers are kind of restarted on a regular basis so that those updates can occur. There's all sorts of basic training stuff there. So I think that's very important. And to take into account first, I think people can maybe get ahead of themselves and start thinking, oh, we need some massive kind of Eye of Sauron type thing looking over our network. But ultimately, there's easy stuff to do first. In terms of the more complicated stuff, I think that you have various risk scanning tools. A lot of small businesses will get this on a kind of managed security basis, so that you can kind of log what is going on with your network. You can look for breaches before they've breaches before they've fully developed. We talked about how there are exploitable hacks being published on a routine basis that affect kind of completely mainstream computer systems, and ultimately then you have, as the final stage of that, the kind of incident response, which for a large company might be internal to some degree, or you could operate on a kind of managed basis where a team of professionals basically are in a position to intervene on your network whenever they see a threat developing, and kind of try and nip it in the bud to the extent that they can.
Andrew, we'll ask you, what are some of the tools that businesses can use that you've seen or that you would recommend?
Without a doubt, the greatest return on investment in this space is human training, right? So I agree with Alex wholeheartedly. The human factor of this, ironically, is the lowest hanging fruit. I know that comment has been made so far, but it is true that the lowest tech issues can give rise to the highest amount of damages. And so, sort of reversing that on its head, the investment in that, eye-rolling phishing training that we were all talking about, and basic email security, email use, policies and procedures, helping your employees understand how their actions have consequences day to day, is the absolute most important cybersecurity piece in this puzzle. And it is the greatest return on investment. And by that, I mean, it's not the most expensive firewall, managed detection software, multi-factor authentication, defense in depth model, zero trust. We go sort of on and on and on with the sort of technological capabilities of establishing security controls in cybersecurity. But I find constantly it comes back to the human factor. It will be lower in cost to train your employees, and it will avoid the highest amount of damages on the other side.
And I think a lot of companies forget that training has to be ongoing as well, too. It's not kind of a one and done type of thing. Brian, we have talked about the importance of training and some of the other tools. I'm wondering, are there certain other weak points within an organization that need to be proactively addressed? And are there tools that can help companies do that?
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of the things where training is spot on. And then doing some sort of war games, so pretending to trick your people. And I know that sounds terrible, but companies who do phishing tests, that's where you spot the problems, and they may not be where you expect them to be. So I love, you do the training, but then you test to see, are we actually living the things that the people supposedly paid attention to and scored high enough on that test at the end to qualify as having done it. So I like seeing that. But then the question is, so what do you do about that? Do you just do more training? But I always say that's a bit like telling people who made a spelling mistake not to make that mistake again. It's like, well, they didn't mean to, or they didn't mean to make the typo. You can't just say, hey, don't do that, or pay attention next time. So we need to bolster with tools to help with that. And, nobody likes changing their password. They don't like the new requirements, the multiple devices you have to do it now on, and do they sync or not? So things that make that easier. What you're looking for is, if we have this mountain of human activities that we need people to be more vigilant about, like leaving your device behind or your password hygiene, et cetera, are there tools that can help you with that? And obviously, we're all here today from a provider of one of those tools, but to be fair, that stuff really works. And to Dan's point earlier, these are the main sources of the problem. It's not the, people breaking in through the ceiling in the middle of the night, suspended by ropes with like night vision goggles. It's the simple stuff. It's the phishing activities. They're hitting hundreds of thousands of targets at once. So you need to have the right protection up front. And then the cyber insurance is, what takes care of things if it goes wrong. It's like, you don't not get auto insurance because you're a good driver, and you don't suddenly become a terrible driver because you have auto insurance. You need to think about both of those: drive well and protect yourself in the back end.
True. Dan, anything you wanted to add to that, or?
And I know this is a topic we're going to discuss in this webinar, but the insurance market is also changing, right? The insurance carriers are changing the requirements that they're putting upon companies in order to get insurance, right? And it's been a number of the questions in the chat have alluded to this, but the scrutiny that companies are going through, right? What are the minimum things that insurance carriers are requiring today in order for somebody to qualify for insurance? And I say this often, but in the past, in previous years of cyber insurance buying, the focus was always, how few questions can we ask, right? Can we do it all in one page? What information can we determine from scanning a company to be able to not have them answer any questions? That has totally shifted. And frankly, if you were doing good security practices, you were getting a discount on a premium discount. So paying less money because you were doing good security practices. Today, with the rise of ransomware and all of the losses that insurance companies are paying, today, you're not getting a discount for doing good security practices. You're qualifying for insurance, right? You're able to actually buy insurance, and it is a threshold that has risen very much so over the past 12 months, where carriers are requiring specific security controls just as a minimum baseline: employee training, multi-factor authentication, removing local admin access from all employees. Things like that, having an endpoint detection response tool deployed across all the endpoints in the organization, just as the minimum baselines. You don't get any discount. You're not paying less premium because you're doing that stuff. You're just able to buy insurance because you're doing that. And I think that's a very significant shift in the mentality from insurance carriers.
As a follow-up to what you've just said, then, when it comes to purchasing insurance, what are some of the questions that businesses should be asking their insurers about their cyber coverage? What do they need to know? And, I think some of them may assume that their business interruption or general liability or property insurance might cover them in a cyber attack. So what do they need to know about that as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And frankly, it's one of the biggest misnomers that has existed in the cyber insurance industry for years, is that you hear these headlines often like, oh, cyber attack not covered by insurance, right? And when you dig into the details of the report, it's a general liability policy, it's a property liability policy. And it's in the news again this week, actually. There was a case that just came down where the Merck decision that their property insurance policy could not apply the war exclusion from their losses arising out of the NotPetya attack back in 2017. So now their whole property tower is potentially on risk for a cyber attack. That attack back in 2017 changed the entire insurance landscape around cyber risk. It was known at the time as silent cyber. This thought that insurance policies were silent about whether a cyber attack could lead to a loss. And it arising out of that that and some other attacks back in 2017, the insurance community decided we are no longer going to tolerate silent cyber risk. We are going to be very explicit about, is cyber attacks covered under this specific policy? So general liability policies now have an exclusion for cyber attacks. Property liability policies now have an exclusion for the fallout of cyber attacks. And so it really forced everyone into this area where you've got to buy dedicated cyber insurance. And so there are sometimes endorsements, small elements of coverage that go onto a general liability policy or a package or a small errors and omissions policy. But for the most part, to get true, broad, comprehensive coverage, you've got to buy a standalone cyber insurance policy. And so that's sort of my take on the whole thing of should you be buying, or where can you find cyber insurance coverage? You're not finding it in your property program. You're not finding it in your general liability program anymore. It is a dedicated line of insurance that you need to purchase.
And I was just going to add to that too. The decision that came down this week, it absolutely is the period, final, end of sentence for silent cyber.
Yep.
Because let's say in an alternate reality, the war exclusion in that case did preclude coverage for all or some of those damages. There would be some insurers out there that would say, well, at least we can still rely on that. The fact that they can't, as because of this case, means it's all but certain now that customers will not be able to get cyber coverage or any kind of cyber damage coverage under any other non-standalone policy dedicated to cyber. So property, general liability, everything like that will have dedicated cyber exclusions because of that. And Patricia, back to your original question too. Sorry to jump on it, but one of the things that I think about in terms of what customers should be looking at when shopping, right? Shopping for cyber insurance. The future of cyber insurance on the carrier side, in my opinion, is all going to be service oriented. So customers need to be asking themselves, what kind of services is a cyber insurer going to offer me, in addition to the policy, to help build my security up, to help my general cybersecurity hygiene, to help my incident response procedures. In my view, partnering, it's not purchasing a cyber insurance policy product. You're partnering with a cyber insurer to be a critical component of your cybersecurity risk management policy. And so what does that mean? You want to know what the cyber insurer is going to offer in addition to coverage, right? So what is it going to be? In most instances, it's going to be the beginnings of or the basic architecture of an incident response plan, right? What is our incident response plan? Well, our cyber insurer provides a hotline number that you call immediately, which gets the process started, which gets vendors involved, which gets lawyers involved. You want to be asking those questions. When I have an incident, who do I call? Who do I get in touch with? What are the waiting times? When can I expect to get the process started? Good cyber insurers, and I'll pat us AmTrust on the back as I'm the carrier representative on the panel, but good cyber insurers will have a clear, concise answer to that question. And that is primarily what customers should be looking for. In addition to that, I would say proactive cyber services. So whether pre or post binding, pre-breach services is the name of the game right now. So what do? Well, I can speak on behalf of us. What we're doing is we're partnering with our vendors on existing panels, so DFIR firms and other law firms, to see what kind of complementary services we can provide to our insureds. Can you sit down with one of your panel cyber counsel for under an hour and talk about your incident response procedures? Can you speak with a DFIR firm about response and remediation recovery and what the company should be doing in preparation for a cyber attack? These are all things that customers should be focusing on, and it's going to be, in my view, really the crux of what cyber insurance is going to offer to the community.
Great. We have a lot of questions. So gentlemen, if you're good with this, I'm going to go ahead and start asking you just some of the questions from the audience, because there are a lot. First one was, encrypted backups is the conventional wisdom to mitigate against ransomware. What percentage of ransomware attacks did the enterprise have encrypted offsite backups in place? I'm not sure if that's a question any of you can If somebody can you just go ahead and jump in on that?
Well, so I'm happy to jump in a little bit. Encrypted backups is a mitigation tool to paying in a ransom. It is not protecting you from a ransom occurring. It comes in the after side, right? After an attack has happened, what encrypted offsite backups allow you to do, something that is separated from your network. I think if you look at most ransomware attacks today, there's a handful of things that happen. They establish access, they escalate their privileges, they look for your backups, and if they can find them, they're going to encrypt those first before deploying ransomware to the live network. And so by having them offsite, what you do is allow yourselves the ability to not have to engage with the attackers. So you maybe don't have to pay the ransom. You can just restore from backup and ignore their demands for whatever amount of money they're asking. Now, to Alex's point early in this conversation about the double extortion attempts, right? The other method that they're using now is before they deploy their ransomware, they will encrypt your backups. They will also exfiltrate a lot of data. And so if you choose now to restore from backups and ignore their demands, well, now they also have your data and they can then sell that or publicly disclose that and put reputational harm or other impacts to your business. It changes the thought process of how do we engage with these attackers. But the encrypted backups is not a protection mechanism. It is a more of a response mechanism.
I can just add to that from personal experience. I have experienced situations with insureds where encrypted backups did prevent a significant amount of damage and prevented even having to engage the attacker in the first place, but only in situations where there's been no exfiltration of data. So that goes back to your point, Dan, where I think ransomware attackers are getting a little bit more savvy, but absolutely having a segmented encrypted backup that is recent, right? So having encrypted backups that were only recently updated 5 months ago is not going to be particularly helpful. But actively managed encrypted backups that are segmented from the network is a phenomenal tool to use.
Patty, there's another piece of how hackers have changed the way they operate over the past few years that also comes to play here in this sort of double jeopardy idea. Because they are a business, they think about their flow and their pipeline of revenue. So they don't need to hack you today for revenue today. We certainly have seen plenty of cases where the hack occurred 6 months ago and they don't take action for quite a while. So they're now in all of your backups over those 6 months. So if you restore from backup, they hit you this morning, we restore from last night, we've lost nothing or close to nothing. Fantastic. Well, the problem is that backup just restored their access instead of cutting them off as you thought it would. So you have to be mindful of that. And so encrypted backups, all of this it's a multi-pronged approach. There is no single silver bullet here, to Dan's point before, but they're a critical and valuable piece of that puzzle. It's just they in and of themselves are not enough. Nothing is. That's why you need to think about this much more broadly and multifaceted.
Always have to build a better mousetrap.
Yeah, you just need 17 of them.
We have a question. When a cover company has a valid paid claim, are there any statistics that show how often the carrier drops them? And I can understand where that could be a consideration. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, as the insurance broker representative on the panel, I will say that that's the job of your insurance broker, is to sort of help you through that process, right? I think currently in the insurance market, there's probably 40 or 50 insurance carriers that are offering some form of cyber insurance. It only takes one, really, sometimes more than one if you need to buy high limits. But for a small insurance policy, for small businesses, you really only need one to be willing to offer you coverage. And so to the extent that you have an attack that is paid out by insurance, yes, there is some chance that they choose not to go forward with you, or they view your controls differently after the attack than they did before. But it doesn't mean that there's no other insurance carrier out there that might be willing to offer coverage, and your insurance broker is the one responsible for guiding you through that and really helping you find a different carrier.
I think it's phenomenal when, I don't want to say phenomenal, but when insureds have been hacked already, right, in the past, frankly, I see that as an advantage, because then you're dealing with an insured and a customer that has dealt with these incidents before and understands that they are a reality. Frankly, on the ground, the biggest hurdle we all have with potential insurance buyers and folks in the market is that they are skeptical of anything occurring. So if you have an insurance buyer that comes in and says, listen, we had an incident, it was fully remediated, we implemented the following controls to make sure that this particular type of incident doesn't happen again. We've instituted employee training. That's all music to my ears, frankly. So I just wanted to add that as commentary on top.
All right, so we have another question. How can small, medium businesses survive the perfect storm of the challenges in the cyber market, meaning greater ransoms, longer downtime, increased ransom frequency, supply chain attacks, contingent business interruption, changes to underwriting requirements, et cetera? Boy, I think that goes to some extent to what you said about it being a multi-pronged approach to address a lot of these different issues. But I'll let one of you guys answer that question. Anyone want to jump in?
I think I may be the only SME here.
Okay.
Small, it's just me.
Mhm.
It is scary, right? And it does make you feel like, how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to move forward? As with any risk we face in life, and cyber is no different from anything. I mean, every time you get on the road, not to keep harping on auto insurance, but there are risks everywhere, and that's the point. So there are things we have at our disposal, and the great thing is these tools are really readily available and much easier to implement or to connect to the other tools we use. So we have the upfront pieces of the puzzle. We need to employ them, the training, the different security tools, et cetera. And we have the after effect coverage, the thing that steps in should something go wrong. And it's a mix of the two, like everything else in our lives. We have smoke detectors and homeowners insurance. We need to think about it that way. So yeah, it's scary. But we're also not helpless. And so it's engaging in a conversation like this and hearing about, what do I need to consider and how do I go about it? Talking to, your agent or broker to get more advice if you don't understand. That's how you begin that journey.
Anybody
I was
else?
going to say in response to that, I think, dead on response to the question is you have, seek out skilled, experienced insurance brokers in this area to help you procure the right cyber insurance, comprehensive cyber insurance that offers all the kinds of proactive and reactive services that I was speaking of earlier. I think that is the more simple answer to the question dead on. But I think just going off of your point, Brian, it's an interesting thing in the world of cyber where folks are, I think, struggling with how to eliminate the risk of it more than how to make the risk acceptable, right? And in just general terms, day to day, risk is not about zeroing it out. Risk is about making it acceptable versus unacceptable. Unacceptable risk is when you have no idea how you're going to cover potential financial expenses, how to get back up and running after an attack, things like that. Partnering with the right insurance broker, partnering with the right insurance carrier will help make cyber risk acceptable day to day for your business operations.
We have a question about what are your thoughts about the reimburse versus pay on behalf of wording in certain cyber policies? Apparently, most small businesses have policies that have reimburse provisions. I think I'll throw that to either Dan or Alex, probably. When you guys want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to field it. What you're getting at is sort of a common headache for many companies when they go to respond to an event. Is sort of, do we get to pick the vendors and then have you reimburse us for those, or do we have to use your vendors and you're paying them on our behalf, right? And to Andrew's point he made earlier, cyber insurance, particularly for SMBs, is very much focused on the service aspect, right? You're buying a service, you're buying a response service, often in a turnkey fashion. Now, the trade-off for buying that service is that you have to use the dedicated vendors that the insurance carriers require you to. And so for most companies, particularly small companies, they don't have established relationships with cyber forensics providers and legal help and a notification firm and a call center ready to go, right? And so it is a pretty easy trade-off for small businesses that you want that pay on behalf of wording, but you are required to use their vendors. It gives you the whole team of people to turn the key and respond to the event right away, and often at discounted. That's the piece that hasn't been said yet. It's all done at discounted rates, right? All these insurance carriers have such significant books of business that they are getting discounts from the vendors in order for the vendors to have the ability to respond on their behalf, right? And so they're getting a discounted rate, and that is passed through to the insurance policyholder as well. So it does work out well in behalf that pay on behalf of wording, as opposed to the reimbursement wording, where you have to go out and find all your own vendors, establish those relationships, probably not get the same purchasing power and discounted rates, and then have an insurance carrier reimburse you.
Another question, and this kind of goes to what you were saying about companies that are taking steps to just make them just doing things that they should be doing for their own, to minimize some of their cyber risk. The question was, are some cybersecurity insurance companies engaged in their own outside security checks on companies they insure or agree to insure? Anybody want to take that one?
So I think I've seen recent survey data suggesting that a kind of vulnerability scan is now an established part of the underwriting process among cyber insurers and cyber brokers. What I think, and that could be using first party or third party tools. And what I think is really interesting is that we're starting to see that kind of thing being repeated during the policy life. So rather than just checking the state of someone's network at the point of writing the paper, you can ensure that whatever it was back then, it remains like that 6 months in and then a year in as well. So I think that's absolutely something we're seeing.
Also, was there anything, maybe we should address a little bit about just the underwriting process? Are there questions or things that these businesses today should understand that are a part of that process? Dan, is that anything that you wanted to address?
Yeah, what I'd say is that it's certainly more scrutinizing and a much more intense process now than it really ever has been. And so you can expect to answer a number of questions. There's not just one application, there's probably two, right? A ransomware supplemental that goes in with the normal application. And the level of detail that underwriters are looking for around security controls is really, really deep and really thorough. We recently did at Woodruff Sawyer an underwriter survey. The number one focus of underwriters, 85%, their recommendation was beef up your security practices, right? And so they are so focused on security controls right now. And so when they say, hey, do you have MFA in place? They want to know not only that you have it in place, but that it applies to VPN access, that it applies to any cloud applications you're using within your environment, and it applies to administrative controls, right? So if you want to log in as an admin, you have to re-authenticate every time. And so they're getting very deep and very technical in their scrutinizing of these companies and the controls that they have in place. So it will be a more difficult process if you currently buy cyber insurance.
Is there anything that companies can do to kind of help lower their cyber insurance rates? Or at this point, is the market so hard that what you need to do is what you need to do? Like what you said, I think earlier, Dan, about just being able to get cyber insurance.
Yeah, I mean, there are things you can be doing, right? I think when you look at the totality of the picture, the level of risk, the amount of records you have, the amount of revenue you're doing, the contractual controls you have in place, the security controls that you're putting in place. When you paint the full picture, that's ultimately what carriers are looking at to determine how much your insurance is going to cost, right? On top of their own loss history and rates that they have to charge to cover their expected losses. But what I'd say is, my point earlier was that in the past, if you were doing the latest and greatest security tool, you would get a discount on your premium, right? That you might say it was worth 10% premium discount. Today, you don't get that premium discount. You get to qualify for insurance, but you're still doing best practices, having a password manager, right? Something similar to a NordPass type tool, or having MFA in place, or having an endpoint detection response tool in place. All of those things in totality make you a better risk. And that ultimately gets rewarded in insurance pricing. It just might not be as simple as I'm doing X, I get Y discount.
Yeah, Dan, I would add to that it's an interesting process, and I'm sure that it can seem like a very daunting process for a business owner to deal with this. But one of the things that I think is helpful is if you sit down with a specialized broker, you can have an honest conversation about the cyber insurance company's concerns. When you understand the cyber insurance company's concerns, you can then translate that into actionable items when you come to the underwriting process. So what are some of the current concerns? Well, I can say from our perspective, the current concerns are rising frequency and severity of ransomware claims, arising from unsecured remote desktop protocol ports, and the fact that there may be MFA implemented on one section of someone's system, but it's not implemented throughout, and it doesn't affect IoT devices and things like that. So if you take that, and I'll give another one. Another one is excessive legal costs when there has been a large data breach requiring lots of notifications, right? And let's say the company uses a cloud service provider to store data. So, back all those things out from the central concerns of the insurance carrier. It helps the company that's trying to purchase insurance, I think, understand what they should be doing. So what they should be doing is exactly what Dan was saying. Make sure you have robust implementation of multi-factor authentication throughout your system. Make sure you have the latest patches available, right? So like Log4j is a great example, and I know that's going to come up at some point in this discussion or another. But implementing widely available open source patches to known critical software vulnerabilities that are widespread. Got to be doing that, and then sort of the last piece would be when you do have cloud service providers with large caches of personally identifiable information belonging to your clients. What the cyber insurer is going to want to know is, one, is that connection secure between you and the cloud service provider, and two, whose responsibility is it in the event of a breach to take on the expenses of notifying and the expenses of dealing with responding to that incident. So we're going to want to know what your contracts with those cloud service providers say in terms of indemnification. So think of those as pieces and pull them back. It will help in the cyber underwriting process. You will get you'll have a more favorable experience purchasing cyber insurance that way when you better understand cyber insurance carriers' concerns. And for our part, I think there needs to be a better job done of communicating those concerns. And so I know we're focused on that on our side.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think we are just about out of time. So I'd like to close out by giving our experts the opportunity to share just a closing thought, like the one takeaway that you would like to have our audience have. Brian, I'm going to start with you on that.
So I think just like your small business, get engaged with it. So you can put tools in up front to make yourself a better risk. You can actively engage in reducing your records. Do you need to ask that information? Do you have to be the one who holds it, or can the provider, your payment gateway hold it, or something like that? And think of the coverage not as a nice to have, but it's part of that total picture. And all of these things must be actively engaged in on an ongoing basis.
Great. Alex, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's important at this juncture to recognise that the market is still quite immature. We've had this massive hardening in recent months, and to kind of look beyond that and see it more as a long-term commitment, because I think the kind of analogy that Brian has used, talk about auto insurance, is quite valid. And we have programs in auto insurance, obviously, for improving people's risk over time. So I think I would continue to invest in the kind of the best practice, even if you don't feel like you're being massively rewarded for it right now. In 2 or 3 years, when insurers have the data to properly price the mitigations you're putting in place, you may well kind of reap the rewards from this work a bit further down the line.
Okay, Andrew, your closing thoughts.
Cyber insurance, and certainly the future of cyber insurance, as I said earlier, is going to be in the services sector. It's not just going to be an insurance policy that I think in the traditional sense, I think especially in the United States, there's this thought that the insurance carrier is this unknown being that you just sort of throw costs at and see what sticks. That is not the case with cyber insurance. The future of cyber insurance is going to be where the cyber insurer is a trusted partner in your cybersecurity risk management strategy. And if you approach conversations with the cyber insurer that way and you get favorable responses, there will be favorable outcomes.
Dan, you get to have the last word.
I think my last word would be that cyber insurance is one piece of the puzzle, right? And that there's a ton of work to be done on the security side. There's a ton of work to be done in organizing your business and protecting yourself and the way you're organized. And then cyber insurance is a tool on the back end and that safety net for you. And it's a very valuable tool. I think there's often been this sort of push and pull adverse relationship between IT security folks and the cyber insurance community. And then it's going away, but I think it's proven out that cyber insurance is a valuable tool to help your business recover from an event. And it is one piece of the puzzle. It is not the catch-all be-all for every piece of thing that can go wrong for your business, but it has proven to be a very valuable tool, particularly in the case of ransomware or some of these really expensive attacks that we've been seeing lately.
Very true. Well, I would like to thank our experts, Dan Burke, Andrew Lipton, Brian Falchuk, and Alexander Cherry for sharing their expertise and giving you an inside look at the world of cybersecurity and insurance. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you to NordPass for organizing this webcast. In case you're not familiar with the company, NordPass is an intuitive and easy to use password manager for businesses and individuals that allows you to securely access and autofill your passwords, credit card, and other sensitive information anywhere at any time. It's a cybersecurity solution that can help businesses achieve insurability, reduce cyber insurance costs, and ensure business continuity. You can find more information at nordpass.com. And this concludes our program. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.